video, I'm going to talk a little bit about plot structure and characterization in fiction. And the reason that I made this video was because I've noticed that some of you are having difficulty deciding between which actions actually show us what the character is like and which actions are part of the plot or the rising action. So when we finish tonight's video, hopefully we'll be able to talk about those two more clearly. This is old. You've seen this 50 times. Another name for this is the free tag pyramid. You've seen it since about the 3rd grade. It kind of gives you an idea about plot, that it's a sequence of events. Okay, this is where things get tricky. Plot is the sequence of events that start at the beginning, rise to a climax, and then unwind to a new normal. The exposition, which is mainly where we've had chapters 1 so far, so it shows you what the normal is like, who the characters are, and anything important you need to know about what has happened before the story opens. It's where you learn what's normal, okay? Here is where the initiating event happens. It's the event that undoes the normal or creates a need for the characters that they have to go after. Rising action, and you know all these. Again, I'm too fast. Rising action, this is all just a reminder. You're going to have a test on these terms. Make sure they're in your notes. Make sure you know what they are. Rising action is where you go from that initiating event, which all of a sudden either completely undoes the normal or creates a need. It's where the tension builds in the story, and by tension I mean risk. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It shows the reader how the character is struggling to get back what they lost, or gain what they need. Climax is the turning point. It's the highest point of tension. It often leads the reader to think what will happen. This is the point of highest risk, and again I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Ooh, I spelled highest wrong. This is the point of highest risk for the character. Falling action is kind of what happens after the climax. It's where things begin to kind of settle down. They're the result of however the climax turns out. And the denouement is the new normal. Again, make sure you have these definitions in your notes. Make sure that you can answer them on a test. This is old stuff. This is what I think might be an important review for you. Look at the difference between these two. If an author writes the king died and then the queen died, well, there's cause and effect. I mean, there's events there. The event 1 is the king died. Event 2 is the queen died. The reason there is no plot is that there's no connection to show us that this caused this. But if I say the king died and then the queen died of grief, there's the cause and effect link. Because the king died, the queen died. And that is plot. There has to be a causal sequence of events. The why things happen. Okay, plot is what draws us into our lives, and it helps us understand why characters do what they do, or motive. Okay, I do the things I do because of the way I feel about the things that have happened to me. Okay, the plot is structured in a particular way. The way the writer structures the plot depends on how they want you to understand the story. For example, in a mystery, you maybe don't get exposition until the very end, because if you knew what the exposition was, it wouldn't be a mystery. An example is a cool story called A Rose for Emily. You might like to look it up. It's a short story, but it's only at the very end of the story that we learn what Miss Emily has been up to. All those years that people are wondering. Okay, and now this is going to go too far. Okay, characterization and plot are very tightly interconnected. Okay, characterization is how the author shows us what the people are like. In order for us to understand what they do, we have to understand why they do it, and that's where characterization comes in. And there's a couple of ways that author can show us what characters are all about. It can be direct. They can tell us George was cunning and greedy. Jack slammed the knife into the tree. Or it could be indirect. They show us what they're like. Whoops, I'm sorry. The indirect was showing us. So when Jack slammed the knife into the tree, that's an indirect way of showing us he's angry and frustrated. And an indirect way is to show us what they're doing, show us what they say, show us what they think. And here is where it's easy to get confused between rising action and character traits. All right, when Jack slams that knife into the tree, there's no reaction to his action. So it's indirect characterization. It shows us what he's like to help us understand why he does what he does. The example here about George, instead of saying he's cunning and greedy, they show us stealing somebody's wallet. Descriptions of the character's appearance, their behavior, what they're interested in, the way they talk, and their mannerisms are all part of characterization. Piggy's polishing his lenses constantly is a part of his characterization. Jack flushing angrily is part of his characterization. It's the narrator's way of telling us what we need to understand about the characters so we understand why they do what they do. Plot and character are interrelated by the author. What kind of a person the character is, what they believe, how they look at life, what they need, what they want, how they think of things as right and wrong, that's going to directly impact what events will shape the plot. What the character is like drives what they will do by giving us motive and reason. Okay? Characters are people in the story. Characterization is the way the author presents and develops the characters for us. And here's an example, and this is a basic example. The character needs something, and their moral code is poor or undefined. I don't really have a strong sense of right or wrong, whatever. If I want it, it's fine. Then the character might steal what they need. But if the character has a very clearly defined sense of right and wrong, then stealing is not going to be a solution for them. They're going to have to find another way to meet that need. Character shapes plot. You need to be able to separate rising action, the character did this, and it's going to cause this, which is going to cause the character to do this. You need to be able to separate that from the actions that show us what the character's like Jack slamming the knife into the tree. And this is an important difference that impacts our understanding of character and plot. If this isn't clear, stop here, run this back, take good notes, write questions that you can ask me when I see you in class the next day. This is important stuff. Once you've looked at a character and you understand their traits, what they're like, then you should be able to predict what they're going to do, say, or think. And here's where the annotation of contradict and contrast comes in. Once you've gotten a feeling for their character in the exposition, as soon as they do something that contradicts or contrasts what you expect, then you begin to look for influences on the plot line. What the character is like tells us how they're going to pursue what they want. It's going to tell us how their experiences perhaps are going to change them. So it's not so simple as the character did this and the character did that. There's a much more sophisticated understanding. Again, stop and rerun it here if this isn't clear. Okay, here's a very simple plot diagram. The box is the event. This would be the exposition. This would be the initiating event. This would be the first act in rising action, the second event in rising action, the third event in rising action. This would be the climax, and so on. And this would be the new normal. And the reason I set this up like this for you is to help bring this home to you, that plot is a series of events linked by cause and effect. Initiating event creates a need or a want or a situation. Because of this, the character does something. Because the character does something, it makes this happen. This is the direct link to this. This happens, and this is the result. Because this result happens, the character has to do this. Because the character does this, this is the result which drives the character, and so on and so on. Because a character does or says something, another event occurs. That event goes on to cause the character to act, which causes another event, which causes the character to act, and so on and so on. What is important about, and this needs to be in your notes, dearies, what is important is that each action requires the character take a greater risk if they don't get what they want. Then they have to do something else to get what they want, but that causes even greater risk because they blew it the first time. The risk can be something outside of themselves, danger. They try to do something and they fail, but so now they're in a greater sense of danger and they have to try it again. Or it could be something internal. It could be a loss of trust, a loss of reputation. It could be hurt feelings. It could be their innocence. Sketch this diagram into your notes. Start with just this piece of it because I can't predict how many events you're going to find until you think you've hit the climax, and then you'll sketch down. Sketch this diagram in your notes. What I want you to do to practice this skill that I've taught you is to track the rising action in the short story I've presented. Maybe, yes. Okay, the short story is called The Flowers by Alice Walker, and if you'd be more comfortable with a hard copy, you can go onto the internet, do a Google search for the story The Flowers by Alice Walker, ask for online test. There's also a link in the short story unit in NiceNet. Keep the video's information in mind, and in your ISN, after you've listened to the story, create a graphic organizer to show the parts of the plot for this story. Then see if you can describe MyOp's character. We'll share this in school tomorrow. This is a really short story, and again, if you'd rather have a hard copy that you can annotate and read for yourself, stop the video now, go to Google, do a search, and print a copy out. Then come back and follow as I read it out loud to you. Okay? All right, here's the short story. It's called The Flowers by Alice Walker. She also happens to be the author of the story, the novel The Color Purple. It seemed to MyOp, as she skipped lightly from the hen house to the pig pen to the smokehouse, that the days had never been as beautiful as these. The air held a keenness that made her nose twitch. The harvesting of the cotton and the corn, the peanuts and the squash made each day a golden surprise that caused excited little tremors to run up her jaws. MyOp carried a short, knobby stick. She struck out at random a chicken she liked and worked out the beat of a song on the fence around the pig pen. She felt light and good in the warm sun. She was 10, and nothing existed for her but her song, the stick she clutched in her dark brown hand, and the tat-titty-tat-tat-tat of accompaniment. Turning her back on the rusty boards of her family sharecropper cabin, MyOp walked along the fence till it ran into the stream made by the spring. Around the spring, where the family got drinking water, silver ferns and wildflowers grew. Along the shallow bank, pigs rooted. MyOp watched the tiny white bubbles disrupt the thin black scale of soil and the water that silently rose and slid away down the stream. She'd explored the woods behind the house many times. Often in late autumn, her mother took her to gather nuts among the fallen leaves, but today she made her own path, bouncing this way and that way, vaguely keeping an eye out for snakes. She found, in addition to various common but pretty ferns and leaves, an armful of strange blue flowers with velvety ridges and a sweet suds bush full of brown, fragrant buds. I hope you're annotating, guys. By 12 o'clock, her arms laden with the sprigs of her findings, she was a mile or more from home. She'd often been as far before, but the strangeness of the land made it not as pleasant as her usual haunts. It seemed gloomy in the little cove in which she found herself. The air was damp, the silence close and deep. MyOp began to circle back to the house, back to the peacefulness of the morning, and it was then she stepped smack into his eyes. Her heel became lodged in the broken ridge between the brow and the nose, and she reached down quickly, unafraid to free herself. It was only when she saw his naked grin that she gave a little yelp of surprise. He had been a tall man. Had been. A tall man, from feet to neck, covered a long space. His head lay beside him. When she pushed back the leaves and layers of earth and debris, Mayap saw that he'd had large white teeth, all of them cracked or broken, long fingers, and very big bones. All of his clothes had rotted away, except some threads of blue denim from his coveralls. The buckles of the overalls had turned green. Mayap gazed around the spot with interest. Very near where she'd stepped into the head was a wild pink rose. As she picked it to add to her bundle, she noticed a raised mound, a ring around the rose's root. It was the rotted remains of a noose, a bit of shredding plow line, now blending benignly into the soil. Around an overhanging limb of a great spreading oak clung another piece, frayed, rotted, bleached, and frazzled, barely there, but spinning restlessly in the breeze. Mayap laid down her flowers, and the summer was over. Use the chart on the previous slide to help you decide which actions are rising action, climax, falling action, and which actions determine what Mayap's character is before and after her trip into the woods. Think about the risk and what she's lost. This is a pretty sophisticated story, even though it's only under 1,000 words. You may want to go back and reread the slides more than once. Again, you may want to print it and mark up the hard copy. There's lots of again and again. There's also some contradict and some contrast. There is an aha moment for Mayap. Think about all those things. Mark this up, and we'll talk about this when I see you in class again. Remember, take good notes. I would like a summary of what you learned about plot posted to NiceNet in your group's blog on the conferencing link. I don't want a summary of the story, just of what you learned about plot, and I will see you in class tomorrow. Have a good evening.